Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/WeHaveWays.
Thanks to my mistakes, the battle had not started well. At any time, crisis might have slipped into disaster, and still might. We were in tactical difficulties everywhere. The Japanese were pressing hard on the rim of the Imphal plain. They still threatened the Dimapur base, while the Kohima garrison was in dire peril. And they had cut the Kohima-Imphal road, which is certainly no part of my plan. Yet for their gains, they had paid a higher price in dead and wounded, and above all in time, than they had calculated on in their plan. Now, our air forces, tireless and bold, dominated the skies. Under their wings, our reinforcements were flowing in more smoothly and rapidly than I had hoped.
That was, of course, General Bill Slim. So, we mentioned last time, commanding the garrison is Colonel Hugh Richards. You know, when he gets there, he finds the town is completely, utterly chaotic. It's marginally less chaotic now at the beginning of April 1944, but not by much. You know, men are furiously digging slit trenches.
It's a staging post, not a defensive position, is the point, isn't it? Even though actually it's an ideal place, or the obvious place to stage a defence if you're trying to plug the gap to protect Dimapur. But it hasn't been prepared in such a way. They have to dig some stuff pretty quickly.
Yeah, his instructions were to defend there as long as possible without destroying yourself. and Richards himself says, nothing could be more unfortunate or undesirable than there should get abroad any idea of the possibility of a withdrawal from Kohima, however remote. I therefore put the order in my pocket and neither showed it nor mentioned it to anyone.
Amazing. There shall be no withdrawals, you see. He's drunk the Kool-Aid, hasn't he, in that regard? There shall be no withdrawals.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about Kohima and it being on this saddle and all the rest of it. And they're all called, there's Garrison Hill, there's the DIS, there's the FSD, there's the GPT, there's Jail Hill. So do you know what the DIS stands for?
No.
The Daily Issue Stores.
So basically, it's named after the functional parts of the garrison as it stands.
FSD, Field Stores Depot. GPT, General Purpose Transport. I have a huge debt to pay to great friend of the show, Rob Lyman. I travelled around there with him. He's been helping me out on this and explaining acronyms. But also he did the Osprey book on Kohima. But also he did the Slim Master of the Battlefield, which is Slim Master of War, which is based on his PhD, but then became a book, and it's absolutely terrific. And of course Slim's own autobiography. So they've been the main sources here, along with stuff I did on the admin box. So anyway, there's also Naga Village, which is to the north. And then you've got Garrison Hill and Treasury Hill and Jail Hill. And to the south, there's this huge mountain rising up, which is Pulabadze Mountain.
Is it all built on now? Is it all completely
Oh, my God, yes.
So there's a proper town there?
Oh, yeah, the whole thing is just completely overrun. So it's now a city of 250,000.
Right.
I mean, it literally couldn't be more different. There's not a lot of men arriving there, and... You know, as of the 2nd of April, the 161st Brigade have been recalled, so they're not there either. But Kohima is the administrative centre of Nagaland. It's small, but in addition to, there's a deputy commissioner, and he's got a little bungalow, and then there's kind of sort of terrace gardens going down, which includes a tennis court below the bungalow, and then a bit more, which leads down to a summer house. There's a bakery, there's food depots, there's a hospital, you know, incredibly, with 1,000 beds. So it's a main hospital area, mainly treating malaria cases. It's also got a jail on a separate hillock. And, of course, there's a Naga village as well.
Classic imperial stores post, essentially.
Exactly. No wonder the Japanese want to get it.
Well, because it's full of stores, no wonder. But also it's the road to Dimapur. I mean, if you go, Rorke's Drift is a comparable place, which is an outpost with a mission in it and stores and lines of communication, all that sort of stuff. So, yet again, the British Empire finds itself in a last stand with a mountain overlooking it and all this sort of stuff. I mean, it's History doesn't repeat itself, and it certainly rhymes. What is interesting, though, is that because of Slim's reforms, although there are lots of line of communication troops and there are fighting bayonets there now, everyone is trained to fight, everyone's trained to patrol, everyone's been versed in the idea that the Japanese are surrounded, not you. But this is one of these occasions where it probably doesn't feel like that much.
I think it's fair to say. On the other hand, a bit like Rorke's Drift, they're not short of supplies. They've got plenty of ammo, plenty of rations. They're not going to run out of bullets anytime. The only potential risk is water. They've got storage tanks of water, but, obviously if that gets hit by a shell or a mortar round or something like that, then you're in trouble. But for the most part, they're actually pretty good. And as you say, it won't seem that way when you're in your small little redoubt and you're surrounded by thousands upon thousands of Japanese troops. But actually, as we know, it's much easier to defend than it is to attack, and you're not going to be running out of ammunition.
Yeah, and particularly if your opponent decides to be unimaginative about how they're going to do the attacking, which is the core feature of how the Japanese elect to fight this battle, really, isn't it?
So this is Nagaland, and Nagaland is sort of, it's indigenous tribes in this area. They are headhunters. They have been giving the British trouble, but since the mid-1930s, they've been sort of coming much more on side. And a big player in that is Charles Pawsey, who is actually a veteran of the Somme in the last war, but post-First World War, joins the Indian Civil Service in 1919. And then in 1935 is made the Deputy Commissioner for the Naga Hills, and so is posted to Kohima and lives in this bungalow with the terrace below him. So basically, you've got the bungalow on the top of the hill, on Garrison Hill. You've then got the kind of, it slopes down, it's been terraced. There's the tennis court. Then there's a bit more manicured lawns going down to the summer house. But it's a very nice place, but is it remote for most of the part. But of course, now that the war has come, and this is the Assam front, and Imphal plays such a key part, suddenly there's been a lot more bustle and hustle around Kohima than there was. But also his relationship with the local Naga tribespeople is incredibly important. And he persuades them that doesn't matter what they think about the British, it's going to be 8 times worse, 10 times, 100 times worse if the Japanese get here. He's managed to kind of fulfill various promises and pledges and all the rest of it. A lot of the earlier grievances of the Nagas have been ironed out, and they're now pretty much on board, and they're not going around kind of wanting to, boil heads of British types and colonials.
Burma is such an interesting... the whole place is a frontier, relatively speaking, isn't it, in terms of empire? The fact that the British are able to go, look, you might not like us, but trust me, what this lot have on offer is going to be far, far worse.
There's also Ursula Graham Bauer, who's this anthropologist who's been living and existing in the Naga Hills from 1937 and befriending them and, again, working with Pawsey to really, really smooth things over. So she actually ends up kind of running a V-force up here. And the Nagas agree to help the British, and they are absolutely vital for intelligence. And so this is how they know when the Japanese are going to come, because the Nagas have told them. Pawsey has made the absolutely vital decision to remain in post at Kohima on the 2nd of April. So although the 161st Brigade have been withdrawn and it looks like it's all a bit desperate, the obvious thing to do is to leave. But that would have sent a very, very bad signal to the Nagas.
Yes, I mean, throughout this, the calculations and the decisions people are making, I think I'd have been in the first cart or on the first donkey out of Dodge.
Yeah.
But there we are,
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I've just got to go.
I'm really sorry.
Yeah. I've got some stuff I've got to
things
deal
I need
with
to see a man about. I mean, I really got to see a man about a dog. Sorry. Yeah, he's in Dimapur. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
You'd be the same. God, what a cowardly pair we are. So 2nd of April passes. 3rd of April, amazingly, 260 men of the 1st Assam Regiment reach Kohima. So these are the ones that have marched from Jessamy. Some of them are wounded. They get sent on to Dimapur, but the rest join the garrison. The first sign of the Japanese arriving, the first firing can be heard around Kohima is late on the 3rd of April. On the 4th of April, the Japanese attack at 4 o'clock in the afternoon for about 45 minutes, just mad, furious firing. The defenders all firing back every bullet they have. The whole little area, the whole saddle is ringing out with the sound of bullets and smoke and so on. And Naga village is overrun. And there's a Japanese journalist called Yukihiko Imai. He sends a radio message to Tokyo saying that Kohima has fallen, which is then immediately broadcast by the Japanese and then subsequently all around the world. But it hasn't. Overnight, the 4th Battalion of the Royal West Kents arrive. So this is the lead troops from Dermot Warren's 161st Brigade. 446 men and all. And this is this brilliant quote by Lance Corporal Dennis Wykes, who was in it. He goes, Yeah, we were up for it. The lads moaned all the time like any soldiers would, but they had great pride in the battalion. When you get the daylights hammered out of you as many times as we did, you either go to pieces or you feel you're special. And we were special.
Bloody hell.
But again, I think that reflects very strongly in terms of Briggs, Christensen, Slim, Mountbatten. Morale has changed. That sounds like someone whose morale is pretty good.
Yeah. And I think the absolute key to that quote is the lads moaned all the time like any soldiers would, which is why you should always, whenever you read soldiers moaning, don't you always moan?
Yeah. So the rest of 161st Brigade have got as far as Jotsoma, which is this little kind of settlement 2 miles to the west. They can't get any further. But on the 6th of April, a company of the 4th, 7th Rajputs does manage to get to Kohima Ridge. But the Japanese are pushing down from Naga Hill, which is where the village is, to the edge of Garrison Hill, and they're kind of starting to push around, and they're pushing around the southern edge of the Garrison Hill as well. The Japanese are just making repeated attacks, hammering the ridge with mortars and firing machine guns and all the rest of it. They do have some artillery, but it's quite limited because, of course, they've all been travelling by foot, etc.
That's all I can bring up, yes. It's sort of mountain gun stuff, isn't it?
Lots of banzai charges, lots of shouting, all the rest of it. There's a quote from a private in the 58th Infantry Regiment, a Japanese private called Nobuyuki Hata, who says, when you charge the enemy, you just become this crazed being. As soon as it's over, you go back to being a normal human being. But when you're in that situation, you go completely mad.
Well, it's one way of going about things, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, it's a very quick way to get yourself killed, I'd say.
That's what I imagine, yeah. So the Japanese tighten the ratchet, though, don't they? So the 7th of April, there's Detail Hill, and Japanese are on there. On the 8th of April, Pawsey's bungalow is captured. And so Kohima is completely,
utterly surrounded.
Yeah.
When we talk about Kohima being completely surrounded, Kohima Ridge is completely surrounded, and that's already being nibbled into. So although the bungalow is captured, the Royal West Kents, the B Company of the Royal West Kents, are still on the tennis court. You're talking about a really, really small area.
Yeah. So with Kohima the ridge completely surrounded, Mutaguchi orders 31 Division to push on to Dimapur.
Yeah, so he's going to leave a skeleton force here to just kind of grind down the defences of Kohima, while the bulk of 31st Division do go on to Dimapur. This is exactly as planned. It's now the 8th, and his intention was to get there by the 10th. This was the intelligence that Slim and Co. had Father Nagas and elsewhere, earlier on, 10 days earlier. So this is all absolutely on message. The problem is that his orders get copied to the Burma Army Area Headquarters, and immediately General Kawabe chucks his toys out of the pram and countermands it. So that is the end of Kawabe's dream. He's saying, no, we're not going to get Dimapur. We just want to get Imphal. And, there's one thing at a time. And the best way to get Imphal is to make sure that we have this secure base in this saddle that we can defend, ad infinitum here at Kohima.
However, on the 9th, the defenders are still holding on to Garrison Hill. If you've read any accounts of this or watched any stuff about this, this is as close quarter fighting as it could possibly be. It's bitter, horrible. I mean, it's opposite sides of the tennis court distances as well. I mean, it's extraordinary. And they're all acts of extraordinary bravery, aren't they? So
yeah. And I suppose the most famous one is Lance Corporal Jack Harmon. And Jack Harmon is this absolutely extraordinary kind of maverick guy. I mean, he'd never normally be in the army at all, but he is because it's wartime. He's a son of the millionaire owner of Lundy Island off the North Devon coast. I don't know if you've ever been to that neck of the woods. You can see it kind of floating there. It's a sort of great puffin sanctuary and bird sanctuary and all the rest of it. He's just not all there, really. I mean, he's just a bit of a dreamer. And anyway, he's got a very little regard for his own safety. And their company is on Dis Hill. And it's up there on this particular knoll that he wins a Victoria Cross because he's absolutely convinced he won't get killed. At one point, the Japanese are giving him hell. So he jumps out of his trench and bayonet charges across open ground with his rifle and kills all the people in the machine gun nest, then returns holding up the Japanese machine gun above his head. He sort of feels he's subdued and it's all going fine. At which point he's sort of shot by a sniper and killed.
God. But obviously everyone sees this.
Everyone sees it, yeah. And again, it's a great sort of, morale boost and all the rest of it, even though he gets killed. 10th of April, Detail Hill is abandoned, another of these little knolls. But, it's absolutely like the admin box, or it's like the Dunkirk perimeter, where it's just contracting all the time. And by this point, they've managed to kind of hold off for a week. But can they hold off another week? And there's still no sign of 2nd Infantry Division arriving, but it's had to come all the way from southern India. It's not a small distance. On the 12th of April, the Japanese heavily attacked Supply Hill, but again, are beaten back at great cost because, of course, what they're doing is they are ultimately just infantry. And, you can have all the mortars you like and all the artillery you like, but the only way the Japanese are going to claim this territory is by actually physically getting out of their own split trenches and marching across and going across open land. And obviously by this stage, all the vegetation's been shredded, so anyone can see you coming.
I mean, in a way, this is not unlike the Arakan the other way round, isn't it? The British are dug in, they're properly defended, their morale's up.
They're not short of bullets.
And while they haven't chosen the terrain on which to fight, they know what to do with it. They've got things worked out. And the Japanese are going to just keep trying the same thing over and over and over again. It's a sort of ironic reflection of the year before last in the Arakan, isn't it? It's very strange.
Yes,
isn't it?
in the past, kind of, shouting Banzai and kind of wielding swords and kind of, looking maniacal was kind of enough. But it's not anymore now that they're kind of made of, the defenders made of sterner stuff. 13th of April, in the early hours, the Japanese try a silent attack on the tennis court where B Company of the Royal West Kents are, and just a dozen of them wearing plimsolls, rubber-soled plimsolls, try and rush the positions without any Banzais whatsoever, or IEs. And again, they're just all killed and beaten off. The biggest threat now is exhaustion. The moment you fall asleep, that's when the Japanese will come out and pounce. So you can only snatch minutes of sleep. And, just exhaustion is just going over absolutely everyone. That day, the 13th of April, becomes known as the Black 13th. And B Company on the tennis courts, they're just struggling really badly. Of the 446 men that Royal West Kents had when they returned to Kohima on the morning of the 5th of April, they've already lost 150. And Lieutenant Tom Hogg's platoon in B Company just has 8 men left. But interesting, that day, the 13th of April, is the first supply drop by DC-3s brought over. And there's quite a heavy presence of fighters as well. There's an RAF group which has Spitfires up there, but they also have Hurry Bombers and faulty Vengeances who are just hammering the Japanese positions, who've got literally no air power whatsoever. By the 18th of April, it is really, really touch and go whether they can hold on. They're holding on by a whisker to the perimeter on Garrison Hill, and then it gets split in half by the Japanese. So you've now got 2 tiny pockets on Garrison Hill still holding out, and it looks like, they're just not going to be able to hold on. And then in the nick of time, General Grover's 2nd Division starts to arrive from Dimapur. I mean, you couldn't make it up. And the first position is relieved overnight on the 20th of April, by which time, they're just in such a state. No one's shaved since the start of the battle. It's just unbelievably grim. The whole ground's churned up. There's not a single plant or tree alive. It's absolutely appalling. So the siege has effectively been relieved on the 20th of April. Kohima has been saved. Crisis has averted. And now it is time to turn crisis and imminent defeat into victory.
Join us in part 2. We'll see you in a second. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Kohima has been relieved, friends. It has not fallen, as the Japanese press prematurely reported.
And we're now going to see how they take defeat into victory.
When you see the photographs of Kohima, I mean, it is a charnel house and everything, but even then it doesn't convey what the written descriptions tell you about what it was like there.
Not at all. I mean, it's just absolutely horrendous. The 4 near disasters have been averted by the 20th of April. This is the last week. So Nunchagung, they've held off the Japanese from Imphal. Imphal and Kangal have not been captured. 17th Brigade have managed to get back down the Tidim Road. They have managed to hold on at Kohima. So, it's all okay. 33rd Corps has arrived in time. Imphal is still besieged, but Slim now wants to stick to the original plan, which is come to daddy, get ground down. And now he knows that he can turn the battle. And of course, with every day that passes, the Japanese get weaker and the Allies get stronger because their allies, 14th Army is on its home base. It's got airfields. They're now live with aircraft coming in every single day, bringing in yet more supplies. The Japanese are in a really, really bad way. And his master plan had always been to exploit Japanese weakness, not their strength. He knows that they're not going to give up, that they're going to keep fighting. But his supply lines are now secure and reinforced, whereas Mutaguchi's absolutely are not. And bottom line is, by the third week of April, it's a numbers game, and there's only going to be one winner.
Who can stick it out the longest? Well, there's only one answer to that.
Yes. And now at the beginning of May, the monsoon arrives. And among those arriving are 33rd Brigade from Messavi's 7th Indian Division. And for those of you who have been listening to the whole series, you'll remember that there was Major Mike Lowry, who was my local friend to where I live, who had commanded B Company of the Queen's Royal Regiment. And he had this diary, he kept this diary. And on the 6th of May, 1944, he says, the noise of battle was becoming louder as we neared Kohima. On the 7th of May, he writes, it rained heavily during the early morning and did not stop. They were then immediately thrust straight into the battle. And although Lowry's B Company was kept in reserve, the battalion itself lost a number of men that day. It was then B Company's turn on the 11th of May attacking Jail Hill, which they'd lost earlier in the April fighting. And the attack goes in the cold and early dawn. And again, Larry puts in his diary, at 04:40 hours, it was still dark and silent as a tomb. Then whistle, shriek, screech, and everything came down with a rending crash and clatter. This barrage doesn't last long. Suddenly, Larry and his men are up and they're having to attack the Japanese positions rather the other way around. And he says, I started the ball rolling by whistling over some grenades, and then we all ran forward. But the terrain was not easy, there being many shell holes, horizontal tree stumps, and the odd trench to negotiate. This, I'm afraid, resulted in many more dropping. So they then soon become bogged down just yards from the Japanese positions. After this, he continues, there followed a sniping duel, and then things happened, the like of which I'd never seen before. It was the nearest approach to a snowball fight that could be imagined. The air became thick with grenades, both theirs and ours, and we were all scurrying about trying to avoid them as they burst. I mean, can you imagine?
God.
I mean, it's absolutely crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
They managed to hold the ground they've taken, but by nightfall, Larry has just 28 men left.
Of his 79 that he started with.
Yeah, that day.
Unbelievable.
The following day, the 12th of May, newly arrived tanks turn up at Kohima and go straight into action. And as at Nungshagum, they make a massive, and as at the admin box, they make an absolutely massive difference. You know, it's armour and infantry together with artillery. That's the winning combo.
Yeah, but that shows also that if you're operating like that, fully combined armed operations, you're streets ahead of what the Japanese can do, actually. Once the Banzai charge has blown itself out, then what? Yeah,
they're stuck in their kind of wooden shelters and all the rest of it.
You get more people arriving from 33rd Brigade, so 7th, 2nd Punjabis. They've come on a brick road. I mean, this is the other thing is, you know, all of the stuff that we talked about in the first couple of episodes about Slim deciding, right, okay, if we need roads, we've got tarmac, then we'll bake clay bricks, we'll do it ourselves. This is all of the fruits of this are coming into play now. Now they've held the Japanese up long enough for them to.
Well, this is Captain Robin Rowlands, who we did a special with him. God, you know, it must be in the first year or so of the podcast. But he had also been with 33 Brigade, but he'd missed the admin box because he was down with malaria at the time. So they're taken on trucks from Buffadong, where they've just captured Buffadong at the beginning of March, on that new brick road, all the way to Chittagong, then by train to the Brahmaputra River, then across that, and then a further train to Dimapur. And then from Dimapur, they're trucked down to Kohima. So it's quite a palaver. And when they first get to Kohima, they take over positions in early May. And they don't have to ever make a full frontal attack because they're already too depleted from the fighting in Buffadong in the Arakan. So their job is just to hold the positions that they've already been retaken by the Japanese. I remember when I talked to him, you know, he went on and on about the monsoon and the absolute endless rain. And, you know, he was saying they were living in trenches and all around them was this terrible destruction and leet trees lying horizontally and not a building anywhere and water in the bottom of their trenches and foxholes. I mean, this is monsoon rain. And then there's this moment that I remember him telling me about towards the end of the battle. He was ordered to go on this reconnaissance patrol by the brigadier, and the brigadier wanted to know whether a particular feature was now clear of the Japanese. And he told Robin to gather as many weapons as he could, Bren's, mortars, etc., and then advance. And at a certain point, he and his men were to open fire. And the idea was that they would then see if the Japanese responded. But, you know, Robin's not massively convinced by this plan because the enemy might be waiting until they're kind of almost upon them. But anyway, his plan was to get within 800 yards and then open fire. But Fortunately, they'd already got going when suddenly they were called by radio, because it's already been worked out that the hill was clear after all. And, he just said, I've never been more relieved in my life. He just felt that they'd all been rather in position of being sacrificed a little bit. But the battle at Kohima is finally over, kind of, in June. Then they're told to pursue the retreating Japanese remnants of the 31st Division towards Ukrul. And first they head down the Imphal road and then across country.
One of the interesting things about this is, obviously, in the last episode we said Mountbatten urges the air relief, just green lights it anyway, because he's kind of keeping London out of what's going on, because there's just no point involving them, really.
But now think what time it is. It's now the beginning of June. And here they are back in Washington and London with a map where nothing much is moving, because this is all part of the Slim plan. Just keep them there and grind them down and grind them down. And then only once they're completely ground down do you then sort of, really properly counterattack and pursue them. So they're starting to get a little bit nervous about all this, and they're saying to Mountbatten, can you get Slim to get a move on? Can you get him to get a move on? But actually, Mountbatten has totally still got Slim's back and totally gets the plan and what he's trying to do and approves it.
It's interesting because Brooke doesn't really grasp what Slim's up to at this point at all. By the end of these battles, he doesn't realise the extent of the victory that's been struck is the interesting thing. On his side of the world, he's backing another general who's been told he's going too slowly and is held up. And
Exactly. It's just funny, the kind of parallels, really, isn't it? And in May, they only managed to push the Japanese back in total about 10 miles. This is doing exactly what Slim intends, because the fighting is very close quarters, it's very bitter, it's very intense. What it means is they are just annihilating the 15th Army, Mutaguchi's 15th Army. And they're doing it in India rather than Burma, which means that when they go into Burma, they're not going to have to do this because they've already done it. And,
well, it's the Clausewitzian dynamic and all that your supply lines are shorter, the enemy's, the longer it favours you automatically. Even though we have had situations where people have been surrounded and cut off. Even then, that still applies, which I think is extraordinary.
So by the beginning of June, it's absolutely clear that the Japanese are busted flush. And so at this point, Slim gives the orders to send Briggs's division from Imphal, head them northwards, and 2nd Division from Kohima, pushing southwards down the road. And on the 22nd of June, they meet. It's filmed, it's photographed, there's lots of pictures of Sikhs and Tommies sort of shaking hands and so on. After 64 days of ferocious fighting, this road is finally open again. So it's actually quite a long time, isn't it? 64 days is more than 2 months.
Again, comparable to lengths of time in Northwest Europe, isn't it?
That same day, that night of the 22nd, 23rd of June, the first road convoy in 3 months reaches Imphal. So the whole siege of Imphal is now over.
It's not just a victory in terms of we've taken back control of communications within our own lines and all that sort of stuff. That process has destroyed the Japanese presence in Burma for now. At Kohima, though, you've had a battle of attrition in the monsoon. Major David Wilson, who's the brigade major of 161 Brigade, says, if Garrison Hill was indescribable for its filth and horror and smell, the sight of its defenders was almost worse. They looked like aged, blood-stained scarecrows dropping with fatigue. The only things clean about them was their weapons, and they smelt of blood, sweat and death.
Pretty grim. And by this point, the shattered remains of the 31st Division and the 15th Division are retreating back through the jungle-clad hills, going back the same route that they'd taken, so full of confidence. But, they were all being absolutely emaciated at this point. And on the 20th of July, Mutaguchi gives orders for the survivors to fall back across the Chindwin. So it's a catastrophic defeat for the Japanese, but after so many twists and turns. I mean, I do think, had Mutaguchi managed to get to Dimapur, which, let's face it, is not that far-fetched, then I think India really might have been vulnerable just because of the stores and supplies. And
the state of politics in Bengal itself, because you've had the famine and...
Yeah, and I think, however unlikely success was, there's a chance of it. And for the Japanese... This is the moment where it's all over. And frankly, it's the biggest ground defeat the Japanese have suffered so far.
And it's a strategic gambit that has failed completely. This is an actual entire effort that has gone completely wrong. I mean, it's a monumental victory. And of course, the following year, there's a campaign of reconquest that is in itself absolutely remarkable. We touched on it earlier. That what is the tennis court still there?
Yes, there is. There's also a Lee Grant tank, which is quite fun. There's little sort of park areas which haven't been completely built over. The bit where Jack Harmon does his VC action, that's now been gouged out with a road that cuts straight through the middle of it. So it's just sliced through the hill. So that doesn't exist anymore. But you can sort of see roughly where it was. Jail Hill is still there. The tennis court has been marked out. So there's now kind of concrete little white bricks where the lines of the tennis court would have been. I remember going to visit Jack Harmon's grave. So he's there. And I remember also seeing this young Dorset soldier who was aged 21, and obviously I'm more or less a Dorset, I'm Wiltshire man, but I'm kind of almost Dorset, so it's kind of local to me. And I remember the inscription on it says, "Charlie, to the world you were a soldier, but to us you were the world, Mum." And it was just, it really got me, that one, because it's such a long way from home. It felt like a very, very long way. I was a very long way from home when I was standing there. But, I had modern transportation and, no war to fight or anything like that. But I was just, it's such a long way for people from Dorset to be fighting in this godforsaken corner of sort of jungle-clad hills in northeast India. And, there's no chance of his mum ever getting there and stuff. And, it's sad. But it's amazing how many little places, you can do loads of then and nows on this battlefield. And if you go down the road from Kohima, or you go from Imphal to Kohima, or from Kohima down to Imphal, suddenly there's a hairpin bend, and there as a sort of, before the hairpin bend, sort of cutting it off is the remains of a Bailey Bridge over the gully. You can go to the place where the troops met up, 5th Indian Division and the troops from Kohima meet. You can go there and see it. There's other little actions where there's photographs, and you can absolutely marry up one place to the other. And
I think most famously is the Kohima epitaph, which is when you go home, tell them of us and say, "For your tomorrow, we gave our today," which I think, given how far they are from home, is the most extraordinary, poignant thing.
Yeah, well, I hope everyone's been able to follow this. The Imphal battle is difficult to follow. There's so much going on all at once. We've tried to tell it kind of sort of as chronologically as we could, but obviously, inevitably, it doesn't quite work out that way. But I hope everyone understands what an incredible battle it was, incredible victory it was, and how actually it wasn't a foregone conclusion by any stretch of the imagination. I do think there are kind of enough twists and turns here that it could have gone catastrophically wrong quite easily. Anyway, thank you all for listening.
Yes, thanks for all for listening.
We've actually got a series done on schedule, which is incredible.
And we hope that you were driven to subscribe to our Apple channel to become officer class, so you can listen to them all in one go without the adverts, or even better, that you've gone to our Patreon to subscribe and become a We Have Ways of Making You Talk Patreon. Thanks to everyone for listening to this Burma 44 series. Thanks, Jim, for taking us through this stuff. It's been brilliant. We will see you all again. Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.